Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's training session. My name is Curtis Brandon, and I'm the Program Specialist for the Strategic Outreach and Communications Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. For your awareness, this training is being recorded. A copy of this presentation will be provided to you, and this recording will be uploaded to our YouTube page tomorrow morning. I did just put the YouTube link in that chat function. The chat function will be utilized for you all to network. And please feel free to, if you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A. So once again, all questions that you have, please place them in the Q&A box. This chat function can be used for your networking purposes. Don't place the questions in the chat box. All questions need to be in the Q&A box. Throughout this presentation, I will be assisting with answering your questions. The participation of any commercial entities in VA outreach and training programs does not convey or imply that the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs directly or indirectly endorses any product or services provided or to be provided by the commercial entity, its successors, assignees, or licensees. Furthermore, the Department of Veteran Affairs does not warrant any services that may be provided by the commercial organizations listed. Today, I will be joined by Kristen McComber. And Kristen is a true powerhouse in engaging and empowering audiences with her dynamic speaking skills and deliberate facilitation. With a rare and coveted ability to bring big picture ideas and the actionable takeaways to get there to life. She weaves wisdom and humor together into a winning combination that captivates the diverse audiences. As a former Division I college athlete, Kristen's competitive spirit and drive are evident in everything she does. She is no stranger to facing challenges head on with a growth mindset to achieve success, an energy that shines through in her speaking engagements, inspiring with expert insight and strategy that spawn industries. Welcome, Kristen.
All right, thank you for having me. Let me share my screen. Okay, let me know when you can see.
Let me see it.
Okay, cool. All right, well, thank you for having me. Today is the last of our three-part series, so I'm a little sad. We've had fun over the last 3 weeks. We've talked about pre-RFP strategies, then we talked about proposal success, and then today we're going to talk about how to avoid the death by PowerPoint. So we're going to talk about how to develop engaging, interactive, and attention-grabbing presentations. So a little bit more about me. Again, my name is Kristen Maycumber. I've been in the industry 20 plus years. I have worked for a lot of global architecture, engineering, and construction firms. I started my career out in the DC area, spent some time in the Midwest, and then I am out in California now. And then 2.5 years ago, decided to leave the corporate world and follow my longtime dream to start my own business. And so we provide marketing and proposal consulting services to a lot of small businesses across the country now. So if you've been to these last 2 webinars, you saw me and heard me talk about the strategic edge process. So as a refresher, we talked about the planning phase, positioning phase, and proposing phase. So today we're going to dive deep into persuading phase, because that's really where you close the deal, you seal the deal. You have to go and show up in front of your client and present your presentation. This is also known as the orals piece, the shortlist presentation. So we'll talk through that and dive in, and then we'll talk a little bit about the promoting piece once you are lucky enough to win the project or win the contract. So just as a quick refresher, we'll dive through each of these real quick. So the planning piece, again, we're asking ourselves, what can we offer that is unique only to us? This is really big picture where we're talking about what do we know about our market. We're analyzing our strengths, our weaknesses, opportunities, our threats, who's in our market in terms of target clients is spending money, who is buying what we're selling, and what's our strategic plan, what's our roadmap for the next 365 days. And then we narrow the funnel a little bit. We're starting to position with specific clients and specific opportunities. We're asking ourselves, is this a truly viable and competitive opportunity? Do we have a true path to winning? So we're developing client account plans. We're executing marketing and branding strategies to start positioning. We're prioritizing opportunities, developing capture plans to start positioning ourselves. And then the RFP drops. So we're starting to develop that proposal strategies. And then we're asking ourselves, is our solution complete, compliant, compelling? And then my favorite question, so what? So we're asking, we're conducting that go, no go strategy and process and asking ourselves the tough questions to make sure that we're, investing our limited time, limited resources to pursue the right opportunities. We're developing our proposal management plan, conducting a kickoff meeting, and then of course, developing and submitting a winning proposal, which has a lot of layers to it that we went through last time. And then we're anticipating the shortlist. And then today we're going to dive into the persuading phase. So this is where we're asking ourselves, if we tell them nothing else, what's the one thing that they need to know to choose us? A lot of times selection committees have to write a justification for award. And so during the proposal phase, during the persuading phase, if we do have that opportunity to go and present or have an oral piece to the procurement process, we want to give them the answers. So we want to make it easy on them to answer that question for them and give them those 3 reasons or those 3 bullets of why they should choose us and give them that, that justification for award. So here we're going to talk through how to prepare what those innovative interview materials really look like. And then we'll talk through the rehearsal period and process and what that really looks like and why that's so important. Even if you have interviewed a million times and you've done it a million times, why it's so important to rehearse anyways. And then if you're lucky enough to win, we'll talk about how can we improve our process and solution, and then how can we use that recent win to promote it and promote that for the next win and help us position for the next project. So we'll talk about how to take a moment and celebrate the win. We'll talk about the debrief, both internally and then with the client. And we'll talk about why it's important to debrief both winning and losing. And then promoting the win, we'll talk about some opportunities to submit the project for potential awards or recognition, and then using that project to position for the next. So again, this is the process. And then there along the left, you can think about the planning phase as conditioning the market. You can think about positioning as conditioning the client, proposing and persuading as conditioning the deal, and then promoting as conditioning the future. So again, let's dive into persuading. So congratulations are in order. You got shortlisted, you got the, you got the award notice that, you've been shortlisted, you got the letter in the email or in the mail that said, you've been down selected, you've been shortlisted, you have an opportunity to come in and present to the client, and you have the opportunity to close the deal in an interview period. Now the bad news. According to a lot of studies, public speaking is the #1 fear in America. That's right. We are more afraid of public speaking than we are of dying, which is crazy. We would rather die than public speak or speak in public. We'd rather die than get in front of our client and talk about our solution, about our proposal, about what we can do for the client, which is, again, crazy, but very true. And then I love this comic. Here's a remarkable idea, which we often have because we're very smart people, rendered lifeless in 127 monochromatic slides that I'll read word by word for the next 90 minutes. How many times does it feel like our presentations are like this, right? We have this great idea, great solution that we've come up with for our client. It's brilliant, but then we put it in it's death by PowerPoint, right? We put it in all these slides with a ton of bullets and sub bullets, and we kill our clients. We put them to sleep because we don't know how to take that remarkable idea and put it in a compelling presentation. The other component here is that there's a lot of studies out there that goldfish have a longer attention span than humans. These days, I think my attention span is like 2 or 3 seconds. You know, I think the average attention span is like 7 or 8 seconds. Mine is a lot shorter. It feels like our attention spans are very short, and they feel like they're getting shorter each and every day because our attentions get, you know, we're distracted constantly, and our clients, you know, they're busy, especially as we start talking about proposals. They, you know, we talked about in last week's session, you know, they're not reading proposals word for word. They often, their main job is not always to read proposals. That's sometimes their second or third task of their main job. And so it's not always their favorite thing to do. And sometimes, you know, they're skimming proposals. They're kind of looking for important elements that catch their attention. And so when we're thinking about presentations, it's also the same idea. And so they're not going to sit there and necessarily pay attention word for word. And so we're going to have to really work hard to keep their attention. And we really need to remember that they don't have a long attention span, just like most humans. So as we get the shortlist notification, just like the proposal, we want to have a kickoff meeting. We don't want to just start building our PowerPoint. We don't want to just open up PowerPoint and start building slides. We really want to think about it as a project. Just like any project, we have a kickoff meeting, we have a plan. So just like we normally would, we want to have a kickoff meeting and we want to build a plan. So as we start to formulate our plan, we have a kickoff meeting and start to talk about these things. So who's going to attend the interview? What's the format of the presentation? A lot of times the client will give you the specific format. They will say, you know, you have 30 minutes to present and then 15 minutes of Q&A. And within those 30 minutes of presentation, here's how we want you to structure your presentation. We want you to talk about XYZ. Sometimes they'll leave it very open-ended. They'll say, just present your proposal or present your qualifications or present your approach. Sometimes, you know, they'll leave it very general. And that is sometimes good and bad. That gives you a lot of freedom. But that sometimes is difficult because that gives you a lot of freedom, right? And then you want to talk about materials. You know, that what can we bring? What do we want to bring? What do we have time to develop realistically? And then we want to talk about the Q&A portion. That's, to me, the most important piece of the interview, because that to me is where you win or lose it, which we'll talk about in a second. And then the schedule. So when is the interview and how much time do we have to prep? And then we want to have a project plan. So when are rehearsals? When do we need to have the slides done? When do we have to have production if we're printing out boards, or if we need to print out handouts, you know, those sorts of things. So again, we want to have a plan, just like we do for the proposal. When it comes to attendees for the presentation, I am of the opinion that anyone that attends the presentation should have a meaningful role. I'm not a fan of just bringing people for the sake of bringing them. I think sometimes we want to bring a bunch of executives just to have executives in the room. But if they're not going to have a speaking role at the presentation or have a meaningful role in the presentation, I don't think that there's value of that. I also think it's really important to have to know who's going to be on the client side in the room, and know how many people the client's bringing, and try to mirror the number of people and mirror the roles that the client's bringing. And think about the types of questions that you think that they'll be asking you, and make sure that you have coverage. So if you know that the client's bringing a subject matter expert in a specific topic, and they're going to really ask you and hone in on a specific topic, you know, highly technical topic, make sure that you've got your subject matter expert that's going to be able to address that topic. So make sure that you're covered in that way. So think about that and make sure that you're mirroring the client in that direction. The PM should always run the show. So that person should be the captain of the presentation and should be in charge of the team and in charge of the meeting, because that person is going to be in charge of the project. And so the team atmosphere, the team camaraderie, the team environment, the team spirit should really be evident. And so that should be, and that's another reason why we should rehearse and really work together to build that teamwork. And so that should really be evident. And then also really think about roles. So you want to identify a timekeeper, someone to keep track of time, a note taker, and then someone to run the slides. And so those people should not be the project manager, because the project manager is going to be busy talking a lot and running the show. And so people that have minimal speaking roles or lesser speaking roles should be those timekeeper, note takers, and slide masters. And then we want to do our homework, just like we do, ahead of the proposal, as we're learning about the client way before the RFP. We want to refresh some of that homework, or do some of the homework, if we didn't get a chance to do it way back in the RFP process. So look at the client, look up LinkedIn profiles for the people that are going to be in the presentation from the client side, understand who's going to be in the room, look at the company news if there's anything out there, look at their annual report, or look at their social media. Just get a feel for what's out there in the news, just to get an update on what's going on, and have some talking points, just to understand, and just so everyone's up to speed about that organization. And then the next step, and again, you'll notice that I am not saying to open up PowerPoint and start building slides. We're not there yet. The next step is to outline your presentation and to build what I call a run of show. So again, you'll likely be given, especially in the federal space, you'll likely be given a very structured set of guidelines to build your presentation around. You'll be given a list of topics to cover. On the state and local side, or on the commercial side, you may be given less stringent guidelines. So again, that may fluctuate depending on the client. But you want to build your run of show and the general speaking guidelines and timing, and who's going to be speaking to what. And so this is just a very simplistic example of the topics and messages. This can get built out much more with sub bullets and kind of win themes and topics and messages, key messages that we want to cover. But again, the point here is we don't want to just dive in and start building slides, because then, just like in the proposal where I talked about last week, we don't want to start talking all about ourselves. It's very similar in the presentation. We don't want to just start building slides that are all about ourselves. And again, that's very easy to do if we start opening PowerPoint, because we'll start pulling our corporate boilerplate PowerPoint slides and start building our presentation that way. It's very easy to start doing that. But instead, we want to think about it from the client side and the benefit side, and think about, if I'm the client, what am I getting by choosing this team? And we want to take our proposal up a notch, which we'll talk about in a second. And we really want to expand upon our proposal. And this is a perfect way to really outline what that really looks like. We also want to think about how to structure our presentation in a way that speaks to our client and is going to catch their attention and keep their attention. And it's important to know that the human brain processes images 60,000 times faster than text. And 80% of people remember what they see, compared to 10% of what they hear and 20% of what they read. And that means that that's important, because simple is beautiful, and one thought per slide. And so you've probably noticed the way that I've designed my slides. I try to keep them very simple, and I actually have a ton of slides. Like for the last, for the 3-part series, I have hundreds of slides, because I have one thought per slide. I don't cram a ton of content in slides. And it's more about the quality, not the quantity. And so we want to think about that as we're building our slides. We want to focus on one thought per slide and keep it simple and not overload our client. We don't want our client in the room trying to sit there reading the slide. We want our client to focus on us and what we're saying, and we want them to be watching us and making eye contact with us instead of trying to look around us and looking at the slide and reading the slide, because they're going to be tuning us out and distracted and trying to read all the bullets and all the text on the slide. And so the slide should be an assistant to us and an aid to us to visually detail something that we're trying to get a point across instead of the whole story. So I said this earlier, we want to expand upon our proposal. So a common mistake that I see is to really spend that shortlist interview mostly rehashing our earlier proposal. So if we really want to increase our chances of winning, you really have to take this opportunity to tell the client more. So you want to take this opportunity to really advance your proposal to the next level. So, that could look like you could offer some preliminary design concepts. You could further define your client service process or your approach. You could introduce your solution further, or even take it further and introduce new solution options. Or you could respond to a perceived weakness in your proposal if you've gotten feedback from your proposal thus far. There's lots of ways that you can really expand upon this. And when we think about some of the concepts we talked about during the proposal workshop last week, we talked about storytelling a little bit. This is one of my favorite proverbs. It says, "Tell me the facts and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe, but tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever." So when we talk about a presentation, this is a perfect opportunity to tell a story. So over the next couple slides, I've pulled out some opportunities to tell a story, and I've given you an example of presenting to a client about an airport project. So this is a very simplistic example, but there's ways that you can tell a story, and I've just pulled out some examples. So you could tell a story about how you align with the client's vision. So here are ways that we will create an innovative, sustainable, passenger-centric terminal that becomes an iconic gateway to the city of Los Angeles, and here's how we'll do that. You could highlight relevant expertise. So here's some examples of a recent collaboration where we successfully did this, and here's how we increased passenger satisfaction by 30%. You could emphasize innovation and creativity. So in the proposal workshop, that I talked about, don't just say you're innovative, don't just say you're creative, give examples of how you've done that. So here's an example. We created a passive cooling system, and here's what that actually did. You could incorporate visuals. I've seen this work really well, but this takes a lot of time and a lot of budget. So this doesn't always work on these short turnaround times. But when this does work, it does really tell a great story. So you could do a video animation that really takes the client on a virtual journey of like what the project site or project facility is going to look like as it gets built. So this, again, when you have that time and that budget, could really tell that really great story. When it comes to messaging, again, I hit this on the proposal, but I'll tell you again, this is not about us. So you probably noticed that like none of the slides and none of the things that I've talked about ourselves. Like I haven't shown you any corporate slides, no slides about our company, our history, our services. And unless they really ask for any of that stuff, I don't think it should belong in any of your presentation materials. Again, unless they specifically ask for you to present on your history or your company org chart or your services, like it doesn't matter. A lot of that stuff is probably in your proposal because they might have asked about that then. But we don't need to regurgitate that stuff because at this point, you're already qualified. They've already qualified you. You're already at a seat at the table because you are qualified. So at this point, they want to know what you're going to do for them and how you're going to execute, and they want to envision working with you. And so to me, it's about them as the client and it's about their project. It's about their goals, their objectives, their challenges, and then how you can help them. It's not about you. The other thing that I think is really important to think about is that you're one team. So if you are the prime and you're taking sub-consultants or teaming partners or even a JV to the interview, one thing that I've done in the past is I don't take business cards to the interview. And when we all introduce ourselves to the client, when we're going around the room and doing our introductions, I make sure that we don't all say, you know, I'm so-and-so from so-and-so firm, you know, and then we all introduce ourselves and say who we work for, because I think that sounds very disjointed as we go around the room and the client has to kind of keep track of who works for who. In an interview setting, I don't think it really matters who works for who. I think it's confusing and disjointed. And again, I don't think it really matters. The client only cares, you know, that you're there to execute their project and what you're going to do for them. So I like to think of us as one team and the same team. So I strive to remove business cards and forget about who works for who. And even if we have a placemat or a leave behind that we give away, you know, as a handout at the presentation, I don't segment who works for who and which organization everyone's from. I kind of, you know, agnostic, firm agnostic, because I don't think it matters. So that's just one thing that I like to remove, just to remove any confusion and just keep it one team. And then I think branding everything for consistency is really important. So the way your proposal looked should also match what your presentation slides look like. And then back in the day when we were doing virtual interviews during COVID, you know, we would do virtual backgrounds for the Teams meetings or Zoom backgrounds so that everything was consistent. We couldn't see everyone's cluttered home offices as well. But, you know, if you do a virtual interview now, I think the same rule applies. Make sure everything is looking consistent and, you know, you're showing up and looking the same. And then again, don't focus on quantity versus quality. I think a lot of people get hung up. You know, if we have 30 minutes for a presentation, we can't have any more than, you know, 20 slides or 30 slides. And they sit there and start calculating, well, we can, you know, do a minute a slide. And so that's 30 slides for 30 minutes. And again, I don't get hung up on how many slides we have, because again, it's one thought per slide. And this is an example of the slide on the left had, you know, 4 different thoughts shoved into it. And it was very dense and a lot of text and just very convoluted. And when I actually sat down and designed it, it ended up being 4 separate slides because it had 4 separate topics and 4 separate thoughts together, you know, jumbled into one. And so, you know, chunk it down into digestible thoughts and one thought per slide so that it will equal more slides. But again, it's not about the quantity, it's really about the quality. And then you've probably also noticed that a lot of my slides, most of my slides, if not all my slides, don't have a footer and they don't have a logo. This is where PowerPoint, and all my slides are built in PowerPoint, just so you know. They may look like they're not, but they are in PowerPoint. This is where PowerPoint will set you up to fail. If you open up PowerPoint and start to use just the normal template in PowerPoint, it does set you up to fail a little bit, because the standard template in PowerPoint has, you know, bullets and sub bullets, and it's got the footer, and it's built as a very text heavy, boring, you know, presentation template. But don't let that stop you. Wipe that out. You know, I delete everything from the slide and just start from a blank slide. And you know, you can get creative and look for this is actually a built-in template in PowerPoint. You can actually just go in and search in their templates and find something a little bit more creative. And then I've changed the colors to match our brand. But I'm a big fan of not having a footer, not having a logo on all the slides. I don't think that it's necessary. I also switch up the visual look of my slides to keep it interesting, because I think if every single slide looks exactly the same with the same the header in the exact same place, the footer in the exact same place that says the exact same thing, you know, the fonts the exact same place every time. I think it gets boring and repetitive. And again, as humans, we lose interest and we have very little attention span. And so I think it keeps it interesting if the slides are different every time. And so just think about that. The only exception to what I just said is if your slides are being printed and left as a leave behind. You obviously want them branded. So just think about that, because then you do probably want a logo on them. There's a way to get around that. Obviously, you have the logo on the front, and then you can bind it, staple it, bind it, or whatever, 3-ring bind it, and then you know you have it. You can just have the logo on the front, and I think you're fine. But I don't think that you need the logo and the footer on every slide. I think it just is cluttered and distracts the audience. I also think if you have a footer and the logo on every slide, you can't use full screen pictures and full screen layout like I have on this slide, which doesn't let you really create visually interesting slides. So you might be thinking, that's great. This sounds wonderful, but I'm not a graphic designer, so I don't really know where to start. Well, that's okay. I'm going to show you a couple tips and tricks that will help you, because I'm also not a graphic designer. I like to say that I play one on TV, but I'm not a trained graphic designer. I've just learned to, use a few cheap tricks, and I've just kind of faked my way through it over the years. But I do use a couple things that help me cheat a little bit that I will now share with you. So one of my cheat tricks is this site called Infographia. I think that's how you say it. So I pay $36, and I've only paid $36 one time, and it's a lifetime access to this website, $36 one time, and I get access to a lifetime infographics that come in PowerPoint that, I mean, you can see them along the bottom here. They are infographics that come in PowerPoint decks that I can easily change the font, change the colors to match whatever I want, and I can customize them and use them in my PowerPoint presentations. And they are amazing. So I have thousands at this point. I think I bought this a couple years ago, and they still send me, probably every few weeks, they send me new ones that they have created and uploaded, and I just download them and I have them in a folder on my server. And so whenever I am in need of an infographic that has a certain, if I'm looking for like a wheel or a roadmap or a pie chart, or I don't know, whatever I need, I can find. So I have them all stored, and this has saved my life for years. And so I would highly suggest paying $36. It might have increased a little bit now, but even if it's $50, whatever, it's a lifetime fee, and you get access to it forever. And they will send you updates. So this has saved my life. So this is for forever. This is one of my favorite things. So if you're not already typing in infographia.com, please do so. And I don't even get any referral fees for sending you here. I don't even get anything out of this. This is just me recommending something that I love. The other thing that I love is for icons is the nounproject.com. So this I pay, I think, $36 a year. So I do have to pay every year. But again, it's very affordable. And what I love about this is this has a plugin. So it has like a plugin to Microsoft Office. So it has a plugin to Word, to PowerPoint, and it also has a plugin for Adobe. So if you use InDesign or Illustrator, any of those tools, so directly in Word or PowerPoint, I can use the plugin. I can go and search for a specific icon. I can pick the color, the brand color that I want. So whether I'm using our brand or if I'm using for our client, and I can directly download it right into my document. So it's got 3 million plus icons. I've never not found an icon that I love and that I can use. It's got multiple styles of icons. So it's got very thin icons, it's got very thick icons, tons of icons. So very useful. And then I'm sure everyone knows about Canva. We pay for Canva. So I think for the professional version, I think we pay like 120 a year, but you can get by on the free version for quite a while. So there's tons of resources on Canva. This is really great. So if you haven't played with Canva yet, check it out. And then even in PowerPoint itself, there's tons of resources. So if you haven't played with it lately, there's pictures, there's stock images that you can insert, there's icons in there. I mean, I use like a lot of the pictures in my presentation. I've just used the stock imagery directly within PowerPoint. So lots of great stuff directly in PowerPoint. So then let's talk about the logistics. I guess before we do that, Curtis, any questions that we need to pause for?
Hey, Kristen, no questions right now.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's talk about logistics of the actual interview. So dress code. This is always one of my favorite topics to talk about because it always spurs some debates. So tie or no tie, jacket, yes or no. My philosophy is always dress one level above what you think the client's going to dress like. So know your client first and foremost. Think about how you're going to look together as a group, and try to dress in simple patterns and colors. Try not to clash. So just think about that. And then just dress in comfortable shoes, especially if you're going to have to be standing up, presenting. Don't wobble in brand new heels or shoes that are just super uncomfortable. And then obviously, if it is a virtual presentation, I don't know if those are still happening now. I don't think so, but they might be. Just be mindful of those virtual backgrounds. And then if you're wearing something that super blends into the virtual background, you don't want to just blend into that, or you don't want to super clash with that either. And then this is my favorite thing to talk about. So I hear this a ton when I start talking about, okay, let's get together and rehearse our presentation. I can't tell you how many times someone says to me, no, we don't need to rehearse. I have presented a million times before. I'm good, thanks. And that's great. I'm glad that you've presented a million times before, but you probably haven't presented a million times with this group for this project, for this client, and we're going to rehearse together. So my philosophy is, even if you have presented a million times before, the group together maybe hasn't presented a million times before, and maybe you haven't presented, obviously for this project or for this client. And so I think it is of absolute importance to present and rehearse together at least once, preferably 2 or 3 times before you go in front of a client. I never want the first time you're running through a presentation to be in front of the client, because the client is going to tell. It is going to be obvious that the first time you're going through this is right there in front of the client, and that's awkward. The client is going to be watching you, and the client is going to be judging you. And we don't want the client thinking, oh my gosh, this team's never worked together. This team doesn't have their what together. So we really want to have our what together. And again, I played basketball in college. I played basketball a lot of my life. And I know that practice makes perfect. And Bobby Knight, one of basketball's most successful and obviously most controversial coaches, is famous for saying everyone wants to be on a winning team, but no one wants to come to practice. So if you aspire to be a winning speaker and win projects and win contracts, then you have to do what it takes to have a great performance, which means that you really have to rehearse, and practice is going to make perfect. The other thing that I think is really important as you're rehearsing and as you're practicing together is making sure that you're engaging. So when your colleague is presenting, you need to be looking at your colleague and acting like your colleague is saying the most impactful, impressive thing you've ever heard, which means that you're looking at your colleague, you're smiling, you're nodding, even if you've heard your colleagues say what they're saying for 10 times, because obviously you've been rehearsing, you've heard them say this a million times. But again, your client's watching you, and they're watching how you're interacting together, and they're judging you, and they're looking at how you're working together, and they're thinking, do I want to spend the next 1 year, 2 years, 5, 10 years working with this team, especially for these really big projects. And so we want to have that teamwork, that team spirit, that camaraderie together. And so a lot of it is in body language. And so that's where we really want to, nod, make eye contact, smiling, acting like we're admiring our colleagues and engaging with each other. If we're looking like we're bored with each other and we're bored by what each other are saying, that's not going to give the right vibe. So then the Q&A, I alluded to this earlier. This is where I think that presentations either win or lose. And this is where a lot of deals die. I think a lot of times we focus on practicing our presentation, but we don't practice the Q&A. And I have a couple rules and a couple guidelines that I always go through for Q&A. So first and foremost, the project manager or whoever the lead is, whether it's the program manager or whoever the executive is, whoever's in charge of that presentation, the captain, I call it, whoever that lead person is, should be the one filtering all the questions. Meaning when the client asks a question, unless they specifically direct it to a person, they say, Curtis, I have a question for you. If they ask that, then obviously Curtis needs to directly answer the question. But if they just throw out a blanket question, then that project manager needs to be the intake. So they directly intake the question and either answer it themselves or they direct it out to their team. So they either answer it or they say, great question, Curtis, why don't you take that question? So they're the funnel through all the questions. The second rule is no more than one pile on per question. So that means, let's say the question comes in, Curtis is the intake and he passes it to me. So I answer the question and let's say I forget something super important. And let's say Curtis piles on and he adds something. He says, well, actually, let me add something. And then he piles on and adds whatever I forgot. And then let's say Anna forgets or adds something else. And then let's say someone else adds on something else. And so by then we've got 3 pile-ons. And at that point, we're all just stepping on each other. We're sounding messy. We're all just stepping on toes and we're all just piling on. And so no more than one pile-on per question. And then the third thing is we want to answer directly, then provide the supporting info. So just like we talked about last week in the proposals, we want to be to the point. We don't want to build up, we want to just answer directly. So if they ask a yes or no question, we want to answer yes or no, and then provide any backup data, supporting info. We don't want to, weave around and provide all the backup data and then say yes or no. We want to give them the straight answer and then provide any backup data. We also want to think about what questions they may ask us. So we want to brainstorm, what do we think they're going to ask us? And then we also, each person, and I always ask each person to do this exercise separately and independently. I ask each person to think about, what are you terrified of them asking you? So what's the one question that if they ask you, it's that, oh crap moment. Like, oh no, I don't want them to ask me that question. And then we're going to practice that answer. So we're going to practice them asking you that question and we're going to work on your answer. Because I swear to you, 9 times out of 10, they may ask you that question. And I've prepped a lot of teams for interviews, and 9 times out of 10, people will come to me after the interview and they will say, Kristen, they asked me that question and I was prepared. And that's the best case scenario, because I want my teams to be prepared. I don't want my teams to come to me and say, they asked me a question and I wasn't prepared for it. So we always want to prep worst case scenario and be ready for those questions. And then there may be a chance at the end of the interview where the client says, what questions do you have for us? And so that's our perfect opportunity to be ready to ask them questions. But this is an opportunity where we don't want to be self-serving. So we don't want to say things like, when are you going to make a decision? So we want to use it as an opportunity to really get insight as much as we can and as much as they'll give us. There may be, there's a chance where they'll say, sorry, we can't give you that answer, but we can always try. But we want to ask questions like, what are your goals for the project? Or, my favorite, what does success look like? What's your biggest challenge? Or, what do next steps look like? I don't love that one. I like the ones in the middle, the best. But we always want to have one or two of these in our back pocket. The worst case scenario is if they ask us if we have any questions and we say no, because that looks like we don't care. It's just like a job interview where we're interviewing for a job and the hiring manager says, do you have any questions for me? And we say, the candidate says no. That's the worst, right? You've probably been on that hiring manager side where a candidate says no and you feel like, what the heck, I just wasted my time. So we definitely don't want to be that person. So we always want to have a couple in our back pocket. And then we always want to take notes of what the client asks us because we want to save it in our files for next time. We should have a repository of questions that our clients have asked us in previous interviews so that the next time we get shortlisted for that same client, we can go back to our interview notes and pull up the list of those questions and use those to prep for that interview because we know what questions they typically ask us in those interviews. All right, so we are done with the shortlist piece. So let's say that we get awarded, yay. And then, so we get to celebrate the win. So hopefully we take a moment. We put a lot of hard work into the proposal piece. It is not easy to write proposals, first of all. I'm sure you guys know that. It's not always everyone's favorite thing to do. And then obviously the shortlist piece is not always, it's hard work to pull together a presentation. And we just talked about everyone hates public speaking. Some people would rather die than do public speaking. So hopefully you take a moment to celebrate the win. And then we want to debrief both internally and with the client. So on the internal side, we want to talk about, what did we know about the client? Could we have known or should we have known something that we didn't? Would that have helped? Did we have the right teaming in place? How did our pursuit process go? Could we have done things differently? Were there any gaps? What did our proposal look like, feel like? Were there any gaps or weaknesses there? What about the interview piece, the process, the outcome? And then on the client side, whether we win or lose, we want to debrief. And so I think a lot of companies do a great job of asking for a debrief when you lose, but not a lot of people ask for it when we win. And so that's a great opportunity to start asking for debriefs when you win. Not all organizations will give you debriefs, both when you win or lose, but it's always great to ask. You never know unless you ask. And there's lots of nuggets of information that you'll get in debriefs. I once participated in a debrief many, many, many years ago with one of the districts of the Army Corps of Engineers. And the funniest, craziest piece of information came out through that debrief that I never would have known. It never would have got published in a RFP, but they stated that one of the reasons that we lost some points was because it was an SF 330, a standard form 330, which is common in the architecture engineering world. One of the reasons that we lost some points was because the project sheets, the project description pages, they had too much white space on them. And so to them, they thought that was because we didn't have enough project experience and to fill the page. And so they deducted some points. And so for us, we had white space on there because we were following, some graphic design, giving some room to breathe on the page. And for them, they thought that meant that we didn't have enough project experience. And so we never would have known that. That's how they looked at that. And so it was just interesting because we would have never known that unless we would have asked for that debrief. And so you find out these nuggets of information that you never would have known unless you asked for a debrief. And then I'm not sure if any of you have content or knowledge libraries, but a lot of firms, especially small firms, you write this really great paragraph or page on your quality control, or you write a really great past performance write-up, or you have a great proof point or client quote or something. But then because you don't have a content or knowledge library, you have to remember what proposal was that in? And then you've got to go back and search in your, server and try to find what document that was in. And then, you waste hours of your life because you can't remember. And so as you grow, one way to start to kind of grow up and sophisticate is to have an official content or knowledge library. And so we are partners with a lot of these providers. And so we can offer some interesting discounts and what's it called, pilot programs and stuff. So if you're interested, reach out, we can talk more. But there's some really cool tools out there that you can start small to explore that will help you start to gather some of these data points to make your lives easier. And the point here is like, who owns the content library? You can tell this, like marketing can tell the story, the proposal team can tell the story. We are all writers. Like everyone in your company is really responsible for the content library because everyone owns pieces of the story, the single source of truth. So it's really important just to have a story and start to document that story. And then as you win a project, it's really important, especially this will get tricky for government work because sometimes you can't really talk about some of the work that you do. But for those projects that you can talk about, you can start to publicize through news announcements. You can write blogs, white papers, you can promote it at conferences, you can write case studies about it. But using that project to really promote it and position it use it as a way to position for the next project. All right, so let's recap here and then I'll open it up for Q&A. So persuading, conditioning the deal. So our takeaways are having a plan helps those who may not be comfortable with public speaking. We want to create simple slides with one thought. We want to tell the client stories and we want to rehearse. Practice makes perfect. And then for promoting, that's really conditioning the future. And we want to debrief for both wins and losses. Everyone is responsible for the content library. And then we want to use our win to position for the next. And then again, here's my contact information. This QR code goes straight to my calendar. If you're interested in booking a meeting, open up your camera, that QR code will scan and directly go to my calendar to book a meeting. If you can't find a time that works, feel free to email me. I'm happy to work with you. And then I will open it up for Q&A, Curtis, if we have any.
Thank you, Kristen. Yes, a question just came in. Well, a few coming in there. Excuse me. If we want to send our presentation to a client beforehand so they know our agenda, what is the best way to do that?
Good question. I wouldn't send the whole presentation. I would just send the actual agenda. So I would type up like a Word document and send the agenda and get their feedback on it.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question. Are there specific colors or language we should not use with PowerPoint?
Colors, I would say use your brand colors, like your company colors if you have them. Be mindful of how those colors look on, like how you're going to be presenting at the client side, like if you're going through, if you're using like a projector. Sometimes those colors don't always show, like yellows show up really muddy. So just know like how it's going to be showing up through like how you're presenting, how you're projecting it, if possible.
Yes, and just to piggyback off Kristen, you should be mindful of your colors. A couple of people could be colorblind. So be
Yeah,
mindful of the
that's
colors
true.
that you may have within your presentation. I used to, when I do, look at capability statements sometimes, I do say, you may need to change this color here and there. You don't want to be overlooked due to the color of all the hard work that you have completed. So, the bold colors, something that's simple and plain, would suffice. Somebody asked, I think that's it, Kristen. The rest of the questions are, one just came in. With reference to initial question, a read ahead documents what we use the military and government issue to of the comment. Yeah, I think we got them all, Kristen.
There might be one for you from Maria. Is the VA required to provide a debrief? Do you know the answer to that?
I'm not sure. I had to get back to you, Maria. I'm not an actual CO, but so I would definitely get back to you with that question, with that answer. Right. I think that's it, Kristen.
Okay.
Awesome. Awesome. I appreciate you. These last 3 sessions have been wonderful. Thank you. I ask everybody at the end when you leave, yes, you will get a copy of this presentation. The recording will be on our YouTube page that's found in the chat. So you can look at the chat to get get the web link to our YouTube page. And also at the end of this presentation, please feel free to do the survey. We'd like to see you continue with feedback, and if anything that you would like to see in the future with some more trainings or anything that we can help you do, please feel free. You have an opportunity to put those in the survey. Hope everybody has a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.